Irish Illustrated Overtime. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined by Tim Priester of Irish Illustrated. We are about 4 hours prior to kickoff at Wallace Wade Stadium between number 17 Duke and the 11th ranked Fighting Irish. And Tim, one of the very first things we were going to talk about was Notre Dame's dearth of wide receiver experience going to this game. It's gotten a little worse since we've last discussed this. It seems, according to sources, that in addition to Jaden Thomas being out, which we figured he was out when they mentioned that he was downgraded from questionable to doubtful on Thursday, that Jaden Greathouse might be out as well.
Yeah, and Notre Dame really cannot afford that in this game. We've been talking all week about being down to 4 receivers with Jaden Thomas out and Deion Colsey having knee surgery this week and Matt Salerno suffering the broken leg a few weeks ago. So they were down to Merriweather, Greathouse, Flores, and Tyree. Now we're talking about 3 wide receivers, none of which have a ton of experience as college receivers. Tyree, of course, making the transition from the running back position. I wonder, Tim, we were already, before we found out about Greathouse, we were already going to talk about some of the contingencies that they would have to turn to. Somebody like Holden Stays, maybe playing a boundary receiver. I wonder if Jeremiah Love is a slot receiver option for them. But I mean, now you're down to Merriweather, Flores, and Tyree. Tyree probably, again, these are things that we're speculating about what they've worked on during the week, but I would imagine that Tyree has gotten some reps at the field wide receiver position this week. So they're really patching it together. When we talk about and complain about not a lot of downfield shots, I don't know exactly when Jaden Thomas was injured, but it likely occurred at some point during the Ohio State game. So that eliminated one of the potential deep threats for Notre Dame. So it's an issue. Look, there's still a lot of positives for Notre Dame in this game. I still think that, Notre Dame's offensive line against Duke's defensive line, I think, is a good matchup. I wonder about Duke's offensive line, Tim. Graham Burton, their starting left tackle, first team all ACC last year. We're hearing things about him possibly being out as well.
Yeah, and that would be, look, Jaden Greathouse, when the season started, if you said Duke's out there starting left tackle, Notre Dame's out there backup freshman wide receiver Jaden Greathouse, it would be a better exchange for Irish fans than it is today. But it's a big deal both ways now. Notre Dame, I think, needs Greathouse. They needed any of those 4 receivers, but Jaden Greathouse was a guy you figured as he settles into game number 6 and he's really called upon, could have a 5-6 catch game that could really help move the chains for Sam Hartman. You mentioned Holden Stays, and I mean, I think Holden Stays now joins Mitchell Evans as the guy that doesn't come off the field, basically, in this game. I don't know if he has to split wide, where you're having Holden Stays not at his strength going against Duke's players at their strength, but Holden Stays in the slot, Holden Stays as a move tight end, a lot of heavy jumbo sets, a lot of 2-back sets. I think you now guarantee that you see 5 Notre Dame running backs in this game, because you said Jeremiah Love perhaps could play a little bit in the slot or show some slot. Chris Tyree almost has to play outside at this point. He could also play a little. The starting lineup would be Merriweather, Flores, and Chris Tyree, which is actually the 3 positions. But if you're not going to rotate those 3 guys out much, other than for tight ends and running backs, they're going to have to become versatile players. And we do not know when Greathouse, what exactly happened to Greathouse, or why he is unlikely to play today. So I don't know how much they've planned for it. At one point this week, and I wish I could remember the exact time, Marcus Freeman mentioned, yes, Chris Tyree can play some X. So I am guessing it had happened prior to that comment.
Yeah, and before we heard about Greathouse, we were anticipating maybe possibly Braylon James, being in rotation, but we don't think that he's ready to do that. Now, I don't know if this Greathouse situation dictates that Braylon James participates in this game. I still think it's more likely that you do something with Stays and Love and some of the running backs and those guys. But, let's not dwell just on this, Tim. I do think that we have not talked about Duke's offensive line all week, really. They are blocking for a 5.6 yard average to their running game. Still think Notre Dame has an advantage up front there. And I also would speculate, especially based upon the way Notre Dame's offensive line played against Ohio State, that Notre Dame's offensive line has a bit of an advantage against Duke's defensive front.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame holds the edge in the trenches. It's affected a little bit by the fact that maybe Duke can now bring somebody into the box when Notre Dame has the ball offensively, of course. the change or the key here is that Notre Dame does not let Duke be an efficient running team, because if Riley Leonard, the quarterback, is in 3rd and 2 and in 2nd and 5, that's trouble for Notre Dame's defense, because Duke is more than happy to go on a long drive and try to convert at the end. Riley Leonard has 2 touchdown passes for a reason. They run the ball. They run the ball with great efficiency, effectiveness. They actually have the same amount of 20 and 30-yard runs. It's either 8 or 9 that Notre Dame does this season. Notre Dame has played one more game, so Duke does have the ability to move the chains with some chunks on the ground as well. And 15 rushing touchdowns speaks for itself. They've played one team that can play football. Notre Dame has played 2 in 5 games. It's such an interesting dynamic. Which defensive line is for real? We're going to get a chance to find out tonight, because that's where the battle is going to be won.
Yeah, and when you talk about Duke wanting to go on long drives, I mean, that's kind of what their MO is anyway. Riley Leonard's only thrown 2 touchdown passes. They do have competent receivers. We talked about Calhoun during the week, and Jordan Moore, the converted quarterback. So those 2 guys will still be effective. But again, they're averaging 12 yards a catch, and so they don't want to go downfield too much either. Now, Notre Dame doesn't want to be. I know that I'm sure Notre Dame fans were looking forward to Notre Dame throwing the ball down the field more this week after the approach last week, but I'm not sure that they're in a position to do that. You still have to, maybe you we keep talking about Holden Stays. I mean, send him up the seam and throw something down the field to him. Maybe Braylon James is a guy that you just run him on a streak and try to hit him deep like they did with Tobias Merriweather last year. Tobias Merriweather he needs to step up here today.
Well, it's not even a question at this point. We're well beyond if Tobias Merriweather needs to step up. He is one of the 3 receivers that is going to play football in the game. It's not even, hey, he's doing a good job blocking. Go catch a pass. It's not an okay thing to do a good job blocking. They have 3 scholarship wide receivers that are on the varsity. They called up Braylon James. They're going to have Jordan Faison dress. They have 3 guys. They're not going to rely on Braylon James in this game. Tobias Merriweather has to make a play. It's okay for sophomores to catch a pass. We've crossed over the point where, he's progressing. Progress now, because this is where Notre Dame needs you to progress.
My point was that Jaden Greathouse, I thought, would be the number 1 target going into this.
Yeah, for sure. It's just that's gone.
Okay, yeah, that was my point, that he would be the primary target just because of his size and the way he plays and the way he carves out space. Now you don't have that, so yes, absolutely. My point being, Merriweather has to take 2 steps up in this game now because of not having Greathouse, and of course Tyree being the veteran, they're going to play to him as well. But I want to see what Duke's offensive line is really like, especially without Graham Burton in this instance. And and there's been a lot of speculation about close game, or no. We have a lot of Notre Dame voices saying Notre Dame is going to blow Duke out of the game. Mike Elko's teams don't get blown out of games. They haven't lost a game by double digits in his 17 games. They've only lost 4 times, and each one of them have been single digits. So it's difficult to do that. In Duke's release this week, they listed all the categories where that they've shown significant improvement from 2 years ago, before Elko got there, to now. And I think I count like 18 different categories where they've gone from 120th to 3rd in the country, or 60th to 5th in the country. They're just a really, really well-rounded football team, and I can only attribute that to Mike Elko. He has quickly become a very, very good head coach on this level. But again, I think that we're kind of overemphasizing Duke's opportunities in this game, and I still think that Notre Dame's opportunities are very abundant because of what we said, Tim. The trenches should still belong to Notre Dame in this game.
Well, one of the keys I was going to bring up before the injury news came out is that Notre Dame has even a bigger advantage at cornerback versus Duke's wide receivers, because Morrison and Hart can win the day consistently for 4 quarters against Calhoun and Moore. It's something that, look, if you could hold your own against Harrison and Egbuka, I know Egbuka was the MVP of that game, but if you could hold your own against that pair, you can handle this pair that averages 12.7 and 12.9 yards per catch, because they are quality players. But Morrison and Hart are better, and this is a time for Morrison and Hart to step up so Notre Dame can control Riley Leonard, so they can handle him on 3rd down. You don't play man-to-man coverage an entire game one-on-one with wide receivers, but at key spots you have to be able to, because Riley Leonard escaping is a great weapon for Duke. And if Notre Dame has somebody else that can be assigned to Riley Leonard and the pass rush lanes, I think that is key to get them off the field on third down.
Well, you certainly can be more comfortable being a man against Jordan Moore and Jalen Calhoun than you were last week against those two great wide receivers. So you can feel more comfortable doing that. I'm really interested to see how Notre Dame handles their pass rush and what they try to do to contain Riley Leonard, because he is, we talked about this earlier in the week, he is a greater running threat than Brennan Armstrong was. And so, I think a lot of it has to do with implementing much of the game plan that you had against Armstrong, in that your defensive line has to stay in its pass rush lanes. How much do they bring the linebackers? Certainly, we've seen that Al Golden is comfortable bringing the linebackers on blitzes. We've seen the NC State offensive line be exposed a little bit, not only by Notre Dame, but by Louisville last night as well. So it'll just be very interesting to see how they try to contain Riley Leonard. They've been judicious in how much they've run him in the two games where they knew they were going to win, as opposed to Clemson and actually that was Northwestern was the other one where they let him run a little bit. But a big ask for Notre Dame's defense to keep him in line, because he's 6'4", 6'5". He really is an exceptional athlete at the quarterback position.
As Al Golden mentioned, it's a bit of a throwback horizontal passing game, and that just means tackling is more important for Notre Dame on the perimeter, more Notre Dame inside against the tight ends, slot receivers, and the running backs. They've been inconsistent. I don't think they've been a bad tackling team. There's some numbers out there that indicate they're a bad tackling team, but I think they've just been an inconsistent tackling team. This would not be the day to be inconsistent, I think, against Riley Leonard. That sustains drives that have no business being sustained. When you're inconsistent against Ohio State, it exacerbates the situation. Against Duke, it gives life to their offense. And I think you could choke the life out of Duke's offense by tackling well, tackling Riley Leonard, tackling in space. Look, all the injuries we're mentioning, they're at wide receiver for Notre Dame. Notre Dame's defense is healthy going to this game. They have a little bit of an advantage on Duke coming in. They have an advantage more so, assuming the injury, their left tackle is out, as we have been told. I think this was an under game before any of this happened, before Barton and Greathouse were out. And I really think it's an under game now, because we're looking at another game where there's possibly 8 possessions, Tim. It's the Navy and Ohio State games where you're looking at 8 possessions for the two teams. If both teams grind out yardage, that just bleeds clock. And with the new rules, you really are down to 8-9 possessions now. There are games you see 15 and 16 possessions in the past, and we're just not seeing that as much for Notre Dame this year.
I don't think Notre Dame will have trouble tackling their running backs or their wide receivers. I think Riley Leonard's difficult for any defense to tackle. Because he has a running start. Okay, and he's 6'4", 215 or 212 or 6'5", whatever he is. So I think he's always going to be difficult to tackle. But I think Notre Dame will be fine against their running backs and their receivers. I did want to bring over, I know that we talked about this in Thursday's podcast, but the turnover ratio that under Mike Elko has just been outstanding. They were plus 16 last year. They're plus 5 this year, which puts them in the top 10 in the country. Notre Dame's not far behind. They're plus 3. But Duke was a minus 44 from 2018 through 2021 in turnovers. They were minus 19 in one of those seasons. So they were awful. And I realize that Mike Elko has turned the page. He's turned the page in so many different areas. So this is absolutely a game where Notre Dame needs to be even in the turnover department at worst. And Pete Sampson brought up the other day about turnovers on downs. Notre Dame had trouble with that last week in their loss to Ohio State. And Clemson had difficulty with it against Duke. In addition to Clemson was 7-15 on third down, but they were 0 for 2 on fourth down. Then they had all the mistakes in the red zone. So Notre Dame has been a very good red zone team this year on both sides of the football. They held Ohio State to 1 touchdown in 4 red zone entries last week. Unfortunately, it was a game-winning touchdown, but they've been very good in those areas. So turnovers, but especially red zone, Notre Dame needs to be absolutely on top of their game. And just to mention, one of those categories that Duke's been very good at this year is red zone defense.
I'll be interested to see if Notre Dame continues with its fourth down plus territory they are going. They're playing the percentages, because if you play percentages in that way, you have to play the percentages all the time, or you're not playing the percentages. You can't choose to play percentages once in a while. You then erase the fact that you were playing percentages. So it'll be interesting to see if on 4th and 2, they are going for it from the 46-yard line, the 45-yard line, or do they think Duke cannot drive 90 yards on us? Let's put them back there. It'll probably be a flow of the game type thing, obviously. And if Notre Dame is saddled with a couple 3-and-outs, which we have not seen much of since the NC State game, I think that was a welcome change for a big game against Ohio State. I wondered going to that game, are they going to get a few 3-and-outs that just really kills the momentum? That wasn't what did it. It was just they didn't have enough possessions in that game. So I think 3rd and 4th down is important in this game. Tim, you say Clemson was 7 of 15 on 3rd, but 0 of 2 on 4th. That's 7 of 17.
Right.
Because exactly. You lost out on that. You lost out on those drives, and that's what 3rd down means.
Exactly right.
That's a great point. Field goals in this game, you can take field goals if you're Notre Dame. You can incur any field goal damage you want with Duke and Riley Leonard, because they're not a huge quick strike team. I think you can incur long drives and field goal damage. That's a win for Notre Dame in this.
Todd Polino is their kicker, and he's been pretty good. He's been 5 of 7. He's had a 50-yarder. He's been pretty good. Notre Dame needs Spencer Schrader to get back on the horse. He's struggled a little bit recently, but a lot of them have been long kicks. I said it in the tail of the tape this week, and I believe it. I mean, I think Spencer Schrader is a good kicker. We haven't had an opportunity to really see that except for a couple long ones, but I think he's ready to get back on the horse. Have we mentioned the name Sam Hartman yet in this? I'm not sure that we have, but I mean, still, Notre Dame has Sam Hartman, a very veteran quarterback. Mike Elko has talked a lot about him this week, and I do think that Notre Dame, despite their issues at receiver, they're still the more explosive of the two offenses, and a lot of that has to do with Sam Hartman. A lot of that has to do with Notre Dame's running backs. I'd say look for, an opportune wheel route from one of Notre Dame's running backs this week. You're looking for all these different ways that you can compensate for what you're lacking at the wide out position. And fortunately, Notre Dame's very good at tight end, and they're very good at running back. And so I'm sure Jared Parker has been working on, as we said at the top of the show here, a lot of creative things to try to get some of the other athletes involved in Notre Dame's downfield passing game.
Well, I mentioned in the preview that Notre Dame would have 10 tight end targets and at least 5 running back targets. That was before Greathouse. I think you probably get a little bit up there to 12 tight end targets, and you're more 5 running back targets. You're right. There's got to be a screen, wheel route, flares, anything you can do to get them involved. You will probably see a Chris Tyree jet sweep, although, I mean, if Chris Tyree has to play 60, if all 3 receivers are playing 60 snaps, maybe he's not the guy for the jet sweep. Maybe it's Jeremiah Love at this point.
I think there are better ways to get Chris Tyree the football. I think there are other ways to get him the football.
We do have a question from ND Dan. Do any of the preferred walk-ons get an opportunity to play? Lots of talk about the wide receiver that plays lacrosse. Jordan Faison will dress. Jordan Faison will travel and dress in this game, just like Braylon James is going to travel and dress. Another preferred walk-on, Leo Scheidler, would be the one. Eddie's the safety. Leo's the receiver. I assume he will travel and dress as well. We are using a pregame preview to talk about these guys dressing. That's why this is a problem. It's nice that they travel. It's nice that they play good special teams, but Scheidler would make wide receiver number 6.
Yeah, I'm not anticipating Scheidler. I am anticipating.
He'll have to dress. If the receiver is hurt to start the game, it's over. You have to dress him. Yeah.
But Jordan Faison would be the first of the walk-ons to come into the game. And it was interesting because his name was brought up specifically on Thursday with Marcus Freeman, and he didn't confirm that he would play. He immediately went to, or I think Braylon James's name was mentioned, and Marcus Freeman did acknowledge that he was making progress or having good. It was very unspecific.
It was lukewarm too.
Yes, it was lukewarm, and so he mentioned him, but he didn't mention Faison. And I don't, you're starting to look. You're looking for tells here, and the fact that he didn't mention Jordan Faison, I just wonder, because I think he's a guy that can probably help you. We saw him make contributions during the preseason in ways that we didn't anticipate. We saw him drop a punt, I think, that one time, and we saw him drop a deep out one time. But I would imagine that he has been given a really strong look this week, particularly if you have moved Chris Tyree to an outside position. Faison would be more of a slot guy, right? Or was he playing?
Yeah, Faison's a slot guy, and that is the reason he could get a chance. Now he immediately goes on football scholarship the second he plays in this contest or any contest. But
yeah, that's true. But I don't think you can worry about that in Game 6.
I don't think you can now, especially a hamstring for Jaden Thomas is not a guarantee. Just because, let's say, Jaden Thomas is back next week, which most guys, when they're out 1 week with a hamstring, are not immediately back at wide receiver or cornerback. But that's an injury that is likely to reoccur. We don't know what Greathouse's injury is. We're not sure if he's traveling with the team or not. That'll be one thing we look for right away. And I should mention, I don't think our Irish Illustrated instant analysis is going to be before we see the team come. It is usually before we see the team come out. So our information is probably going to have to filter over to our Irish Illustrated message board in terms of who's on the trip and anything along those lines.
Yeah. This is, I mean, it goes without saying, this is absolutely a huge game for Notre Dame. There's a lot of momentum for what it's worth among the media that Duke will win this football game. I'd be interested to see, Tim, what the environment in the stadium is like, because we were there 4 years ago and Notre Dame controlled that game, but I don't think anybody in the country.
There's no environment for that.
No, it's completely different. And even now, even though Duke's 4-0 and there's a ton of momentum with Mike Elko, I don't think anybody is, when they're talking about home crowds that are hard to play in front of for the opposing team. Not too many people are going to mention Wallace Wade Stadium. Maybe in the history of Wallace Wade Stadium, I don't think that's ever been mentioned. But it is on the road, a different environment. We're throwing out a lot of freshman names, that will be participating in this game, and you just don't know exactly how they're going to react on the road. But all hands on deck with the running backs too. I wonder if, we mentioned Jeremiah Love as a potential slot guy. Tim, who else would you, among those running backs, look to? I mean, they were trying to throw a screen pass to Jadarian Price late in the game last week. So
I don't change the roles of the players in terms of moving a guy to a slot, moving a guy outside, as much as Cooper Flanagan gets some snaps at tight end to spell David Sherwood, because you're going heavy, and Flanagan could be a threat in the seam. I think Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love, and then, of course, Devin Ford, three of the guys we saw in the two-back sets. I think you see more two-back sets out of that trio. Audric Estime should get the lion's share of the carries. I mean, we have a question here. Just run the damn ball and get out of there. You might be able to run the ball 38 times to win this game. But, Tim, you mentioned it already. Sam Hartman. It took a long time to get to Sam Hartman. He has to have a Sam Hartman day. He took one step back against Ohio State. It's understandable, because Ohio State's a very good defense with NFL players all over the place. I think they needed more out of Hartman. They definitely need more out of Hartman today, because he has to cajole an offense at times down the field. You move Chris Tyree to X. What does that mean for Sam Hartman on 3rd and 7? How many times has he worked with Chris Tyree as the X? I think it's a difficult ask to move too many guys around, but they're stuck with it because they have three wide receivers. I think those receivers are going to play 98% of the wide receiver snaps in this game will be those three wide receivers, if not 100%.
Well, you mentioned Sam Hartman again, Tim, and he has to be a 75% passer today.
Right.
He can't turn the wrong way on a running play. He has to play like a 6-year senior. Look, we're nitpicking with him. He was playing against Ohio State last week, and he played well. I mean, he was 17-25, and he did a lot of good things. And while we're talking about tight ends, a lot of our conversation, I don't know how much we've talked about this during our Irish Illustrated Insiders during the week, but we've heard a lot of talk about them really wanting to get Eli Raritan back. It won't be this week. It could be next week. That may be something that they're going to focus on a little bit more. And now they need him more than ever, because when we talk about Holden Stays playing, to the boundary side, Eli Raritan is absolutely a great candidate for that as a tight end, a guy that can flex out for you and give you some wide receiver like reps.
Yeah, well, he'd be a great addition today, but as far as we know, that can't happen just the way Marcus Freeman discussed it prior. And that was during the week when he probably had this information about Greathouse, and he knew Thomas wouldn't play. So going forward, as I said, hamstrings linger. We don't know if Greathouse is back next week, so Eli Raritan would be a huge weapon, especially in the red zone, because I also don't look at Tobias Merriweather and Chris Tyree as red zone weapons. Like, if you were to rank the red zone weapons coming into the season and you went with wide receivers, you would probably say Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores before you got to someone like Tobias Merriweather and certainly Chris Tyree. So, and the tight ends are ahead of them. So I expect a big day from Holden Stays. They need one wide receiver to have a very good day and the other ones to play good football. Other than that, Tim, I think the running game will be the key today. And we haven't mentioned Mitchell Evans. I guess he's a given at this point that Mitchell Evans will be involved in the passing game as well.
He is. And you talk about Merriweather, and, just how important he is today. There, if they can get a matchup against, we've talked about Miles Jones, the transfer from Texas A&M. He has great size, but if you can get a matchup with Merriweather against one of their smaller corners, Chandler Rivers is one, Joshua Pickett, I'm not sure how much. Rivers, I think, is the main guy there. And they have a strong safety who's really a good football player, Jalen Stinson, who I really like. He was among the leading tacklers last year. He is again this year, but he's 5'8". So that's where Tobias Merriweather comes into play. The length that he offers to them could be very important. And again, what you can do with a tight end like Mitchell Evans. I mean, does Mitchell Evans ever match up against Jalen Stinson? He's almost got a foot on him. Evans is listed, I don't know, 6'5", 6'6", and Stinson's 5'8". So those are some of the little matchups that we will look for as the game progresses that Notre Dame needs to take advantage of.
And I think there's one more. What about this for once? Notre Dame could cause a turnover or two as well. They work on it just like Duke does. They work on it all the time. All we talked about was how they start every practice with ball disruption drills. They forced 7. Is it 7 fumbles now? 8 fumbles have been forced. Or just not recovering them.
7. It was 7 going into Ohio State.
So it's still 7 then, technically, probably going in the game.
Right.
Yeah, it's time to recover a fumble. You don't have to play scared of Duke having a 2-0 turnover advantage. If you get 2 turnovers on Duke, Duke's not beating Notre Dame. Duke would have to get 5 turnovers against Notre Dame if Notre Dame could force 2 turnovers against Duke at opportune times. And that's something you would like to see from Al Golden's defense, because it's a point of emphasis. They're not a group that is content playing solid defense, sound across the board. They want ball disruptions as well.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we talked on Thursday in Irish Illustrated Insider about Notre Dame's safeties. They have to be better. They have to be on point. They have to tackle very well. When their quarterback, when Riley Leonard takes off, when one of their running backs gets to the second level, Notre Dame's safety play has to be really good again tonight. Notre Dame has to play well. It goes without saying, Duke is going to have to play one of the best games. One of the best games that they have played under Mike Elko. Now, I know that they beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns, but we talked about it earlier in the week that if you look at the stat chart, they got hammered. They gave up 29 first downs to Clemson. Now, without Notre Dame's, full complement of receivers, they may not be in a position for 29 first downs tonight. But I still think with Notre Dame in the trenches, they're still in position to have a 25 first down night. And if that happens, then Duke can't win this football game.
We have a football game to go to. Make a drive over to Wallace Wade Stadium. Tim, you can take a look at Cameron Indoor. It's been a while, right? Maybe 2019 since we've walked by that. So that'll be fun for a little bit.
Yeah, very much looking forward to stopping in there. You look at the trophy case and you get a little bit of a chill down your spine, because that's college basketball mecca, no doubt about it.
Instant analysis also coming up in a couple of hours. And as I said, we will probably have to do our final injury updates and any information like that on our Irish Illustrated Four Horsemen Lounge message board. Until then, he's Tim Priester. I'm Tim O'Malley. This has been Irish Illustrated Overtime.